next session is focusing on the experience of being LGBTQ in the UP. And currently, we have two of our presenters in the room. I'm not sure if the third will be here, but I'll at least introduce our first two and get things rolling so that they have plenty of time to speak on this. Once again, just a reminder, if you are just popping in to this webinar, that none of our presenters can see or hear you, but we can receive your questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So if at any point during their words you have a question that you'd like to ask, you're welcome to pop that into the Q&A. We'll also have a time dedicated to asking and answering questions at the end. So now I'll introduce our presenters. So Shirley Brazo is a contingent full professor with the Center for Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University. Her degrees include a Bachelor of Arts in Business Administration with a major in accounting, a Master of Arts in English Writing, and a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing, all from NMU. She and her wife, Liz, have 6 children in their blended family and 13 grandchildren. In addition, Shirley is an enrolled member of the Keweenaw Bay tribe of Chippewa Indians. She has over 40 short stories, poems, essays, and academic papers published nationally and internationally. Also presenting today, we have Dr. Chet DeFonso, who's an associate professor in the Department of History and has lived in Marquette since 1990. He was involved with the first LGBTQ organizations on campus in the 1990s, was co-founder of the Allies Faculty and Staff Interest and Support Group, and created a course on LGBTQ history that has been taught roughly every other year since 2002. So I'd like to thank these presenters for being here to speak on this very important subject today. And whoever wants to kick things off is welcome to do so.
I defer to my esteemed colleague, Dr. DeFonso.
Well, I would send that right back to you, Shirley. I feel like I'm the newcomer here. I am not a native of the Upper Peninsula. I've only been here for 30 years. So I feel like it would be better to have someone who has a longer experience of life in the Upper Peninsula, and really also a more integral understanding of the Upper Peninsula. I as well as, of course, being indigenous, also being someone with such a heritage and a experience in the Upper Peninsula. I would you mind going first?
Sure. I mean, with a buildup like that, Chet, how could I not? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I love the way that you say I have a little bit longer history here in the UP than you do, because yes, I am a lifelong resident of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I was born and raised in Ironwood and lived there for the first 30 years of my life. And then I moved here to the Marquette area and have spent the next 30 plus years of my life here. So yes, I've always been a Upper person here. So it's been a really different experience being LGBT and coming to that realization later in my adult life. And, you know, the road was not always an easy road to follow. Certainly when I was growing up in Ironwood, you know, like Chet says, taking this back to my Native heritage, there was a lot of discrimination that was felt in the area for people who were Native and grew up off the reservation. We certainly experienced that. And so then, you know, along in my life to then come to the realization that I was also a woman identified woman, it's like, okay, so here we go. So now I check off many boxes on everybody's standard forms of being, you know, over 60 and female and lesbian and Native American. So you know, just keep ticking off those boxes where you need to. But the experience for the most part, especially as my current wife and I were, you know, becoming a couple and figuring all of this out, we each came from a background where we had each been married to a man at one point in our life. When you grew up from the time period, and I'm sure, you know, Chet and some others who are on here would agree that um, that's kind of what was expected of you. That's what you knew to do. You didn't have role models to follow very often, or didn't know of other people. Because people were very closeted. It certainly was not acceptable to be a gay person in the time periods when Chet and I were growing up. And so, you know, and like I said, you know, you sometimes don't figure this out until later in life. And so that's how we ended up also having children in our marriage. Um, but it was really difficult dissolving those marriages, not so much the divorce part itself, but the custody of our children. Because we're talking back now, 1987 to 89. And during that time period, I mean, we have 6 children, we each have 3, and we lost custody of 5 of those 6 children. Even though when we took it into court, I mean, and obviously, if I was good enough to parent one child, why wasn't I good enough to parent the other 2? Which is still something I've been trying to figure out all these years later. So it was a really tough, tough life for a long time for the both of us. We spent, and it's a different life than many of the other LGBT people in the Upper Peninsula go through, because not a lot of us have children or have had partners, and, you know, that we've had biological children, you know, from a traditional male-female sort of liaisons. So it was different. So even trying to connect with the community here was a really difficult experience, because many of the other people that we encountered didn't have children and didn't understand why, okay, well, let's have this big potluck or this get together or something on this weekend. So can you come? What can you bring? I'm sorry, I can't come that weekend. I have to go pick up my children for a visitation, and I'm not giving up that time with them. You know, and then also when you do have children with you, you have to think about, how is this going to affect them while they're going through the school system? You don't want to make things more difficult on their lives either. And so Liz and I were not very out in the community. You know, I'm sure there were some people who knew us and our close friends, of course, and those we had reached out to, but it wasn't like we had made some huge proclamation, you know, when we were here to say, okay, here we are, you know, we're here, we're queer, work with us, because you worry about the children always. So at different points of our life too, then we ended up with 5 out of the 6 who came to live with us at various times. And that was a marvelous experience, but again, gives you a different experience. You can't just pick up and go and do and engage in other activities then, when you also have to worry about raising the family. And you know, I guess I can't stress it enough, is that making sure that the kids are okay. So you know, times progress, things did get a little better. They did get a little easier. Now in August, Liz and I we've been together for 33 years, but we've only been married for the last 4 or 5 years, since 2015, 5 years now, when it was legal. You know, the laws changed the end of June, and August 1st, man, we had a wedding. And we were, you know, this was important to us, and which is not the same path that a lot of people take. They don't feel the need for it, or choose not to even keep some of the traditional names, like we both consider ourselves wives. And that's just the language we know. So that's the language we use. I'm sure there's a lot of other language out there, but you know, this is what's comfortable and familiar to us. So Now we can joke and say, well, yeah, we had a 28-year engagement, had to make sure we were right for each other. But it wasn't that easy. It was tough to be a couple and to be a lesbian couple here, even in Marquette, which by far we've found the most acceptance of anywhere, that we've lived across the Upper Peninsula. So it's a different experience. But then even at work, you worry before all the laws had changed of how much are you out to your colleagues? How much do you say? How much do you just say, well, my roommate and I have something to do this weekend, or, my friend and I are doing something or another else. So you just talk about the kids. So for a lot of time, even here at work, I wasn't really out to a lot of folks. So, and seriously, it shouldn't matter. We shouldn't have to keep this hidden about who we are, but you do. And again, you keep yourself safe, to keep your jobs, to keep your positions. My wife worked for the state of Michigan, and it was certainly frowned upon for her to be lesbian. So she could, she had a chance of losing her job. So we had to be more closeted than we would really have preferred to be. We didn't really have the choice. So many years ago, 1999, that's when we started, right, Chet, with Allies. We kind of, hear a bunch of us at Northern are like, okay, we've got to have a support system here for ourselves, for other faculty and staff, and spread it out to the students, obviously. But we've got to start with something where we can start supporting one another, because we all have that in common, even if we might have different avenues that we took to get where we are and to become part of the Northern community. So we all brought those various backgrounds with us and started the Allies organization. And, we've been going strong since then, and hopefully have been able to provide a lot of support to faculty and staff here on campus and in the community as well. We've tried to do a lot of programming. I'm sure Chet will talk more about his scholarship and such, but, just trying to make that difference. And different people through the years, when they have interviewed to come here at Northern, they would call me up after hours and say, tell us what's it really like there? Is it safe for me to come there? What kind of support will I have if I come there? And a lot of times, people introduce themselves, and that's all I had was just a name, and they were from various departments all across campus. They just wanted an idea of what the climate was like. And so they wanted to talk to someone else who would give them the real information of what it was, not just on campus, but here in our community as well. So that's quite a bit of it. And I think that's about my 15 minutes or so. So maybe we'll let Chet pick her up from there.
Well, that's really, thank you. I had not heard your story, Shirley. So I feel like I'm really privileged this morning to have gotten to know you better. Not Shirley and I are on a number of committees together on campus. So I spent a fair amount of time with Shirley, of course, going back to the late 1990s with the Allies group, and then with other organizations on campus too. It's really been a very warm and friendly working relationship that we've been able to develop over the years. Well, as I mentioned, I'm not a native of Michigan, of the Upper Peninsula. I moved here in 1990. I was right out of graduate school, and I was not out of the closet when I moved to Marquette either. I was coming through the phases of accepting my own sexuality, but I was not out to my parents or to most of my friends when I moved here. So the experience of living here in the Upper Peninsula definitely shaped my coming out experiences, and it also shaped my socialization to being an out gay person. Challenges of being LGBTQ in the Upper Peninsula are real because of the distance in general between people, both both a physical distance as well. And there's a certain psychological distance here as well that can make it harder to, just harder to find communities, especially when there aren't visual markers of your membership in a certain group. 1990, I'm a historian, so I think in terms of dates. 1990 was also only 21 years from the Stonewall riots, which a lot of people regard as one of the seminal path-breaking moments in the history of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people in the America and in the world. It was only 21 years since Stonewall. And while there had been a lot of activities and developments, things were still just coming along in 1990. We have come as a community or as connected communities in the LGBTQ world so far in the last 30 years. I have a hard time explaining to younger people what it was really like the to be a sexual identity minority, to be a gender minority, gender expression minority person in that time period. One thing, we were all less, well, I speak for myself. I was much less aware and knowledgeable, and I didn't understand myself, much less other LGBTQ people. So it's been a learning process for me and for everybody in my generation. And it's still a work in progress. Still very much a work in progress. So I think what's true for me would be true for other people in the LGBTQ world, that we've come a long way since 1990 in the last 30 years. We are not perfect yet, but we're learning. And sometimes the young people who come here, I'm talking about our students at Northern and their friends, sometimes they are very knowledgeable and experienced, and they have a perspective that I don't have, or they have experiences, they have encounters with the world in other places they've developed, and I have a lot to learn from them. And that's one of the really exciting things about being at a institution like Northern, where I feel it's not just a top-down institution where the people who are the guardians of knowledge pass down the wisdom from Mount Olympus. We learn a lot from our students as well. And that's definitely been something that's taking place in the LGBTQ world, where people have grown up in metropolitan areas, or people who've grown up in rural areas and who have struggled and encountered opposition in their own personal lives or their social lives. They come to Northern and they bring us energy and commitment and activism. Some of the most remarkable people in the world have come through the Upper Peninsula in general, but especially come through Marquette and NMU in the last 30 years. I was thinking when I was thinking about my remarks this morning of the LGBTQ people, young people who I've had the privilege of encountering in my time at Northern, and it just causes me to lose my breath and to gasp at what a tremendous privilege it's been to be in a situation where I can encounter, maybe learn from, but also share my own understanding and knowledge with some young people, and to help them and to be helped by them. It's been one of the best things in my life, seriously. And I thought I could come up with a checklist, and I could go through names, but there's too many, and you're just gonna have to take my word for it. Or maybe you've encountered some of these people too, who have maybe graduated from Northern, maybe they only spent a few years here, but they've gone out and they're doing incredible things in the world, and they've become incredible people. And that's one of the best things I think that's happened in the last 3 decades. Not only the legal changes, the institution of marriage, the relaxation of discrimination, but also the creation of a whole community of younger people, I should say now, because some of them aren't so young anymore. But to see that happen and to have been part of that, that's one of the really dramatic and significant changes of the last 30 years in the Upper Peninsula. Now, some of them have left the Upper Peninsula, but that's happens to everybody. That's part of our blessing and our curse here in our community, is that we encounter, we are shaped by all these remarkable people.
Yes.
And then after a period of time, they're gone. And maybe some of them will come back, and maybe some of them are staying here for a time being, but it's just the nature of where we are, who we are, what kind of a socioeconomic, cultural world we live in. So many of our wonderful people, they go elsewhere, and that's good. That's good. It's heartbreaking at times, but it's good too when you can observe these people from a distance and think, wow, I knew that person when they were at Northern and they were doing something remarkable, and I thought, well, I'm a better person just being in the same institution where this person is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exaggerating. I'm talking from the heart. I want to bring back a memory from 1990. I think it was the first organization to be created at Northern where there was going to be some kind of a LGBTQ identity. It was a counseling and support group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was created by through the work of Mary Etchison.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, still a colleague at Northern, who's done remarkable things in counseling over the years. Always be grateful for her leadership in making that effort back in 1990. It was such a different world. There was a small notice in the Northwind in the classified section, support group for people of lesbian and gay identities, or lesbian and gay preferences or orientations being founded. To find out more, call the counseling center. You had to call the counseling center, go through an interview, and then if they thought you were a real person, then they would give you the information. The support group met in the evenings in the counseling center office in Cohodes. And many people who went to the meeting said it was the most frightening thing they'd ever done. Going to a support group in the University Counseling Center, because what if somebody saw them outside the building? It was held in the evening. What are you doing going to this building late at night at 6 o'clock in Marquette is late at night? What are you doing going to Cohodes late in the evening? And then everybody would know. Even though nobody knew outside the group what was going on, it still felt so scary to get in that elevator. And then when you got to the room, there were people that you knew and who you recognized, but you're here? Why are you here? And so many people would say, well, I'm just questioning. I'm exploring. I have some questions. That was a very brave thing to do. It was a very brave group of people who met and who started to come to terms with being LGBTQ in the Upper Peninsula. that's one observation I have. The other would have to do with the relationship of Marquette to the rest of the Upper Peninsula, and that is because of the nature of our institution. We do attract not just students, but a lot of community interest in what's going on at NMU. And for the most part, NMU's done a very good and positive job of portraying strong commitment to values that promote the individual lives of LGBTQ people. When I came out to members of my department, the history department, at first I was petrified, but I was accepted and welcomed, and I was specifically told that if I wanted to pursue research interests in this area, that the members of my department would support me, and that was very, very important. Mm-hmm. And then when I developed the idea of creating a course on LGBTQ history, I had the complete support of my department, and later of colleagues in the university, in the college, and the university at large, in approving the course as something to be part of the regular curriculum. Back then, we still had a printed bulletin, and it was so exciting to open the bulletin and see the words lesbian and gay in print. Mm-hmm. Something related to, that was positive. And then people from parts of the Upper Peninsula hearing about that. I remember traveling once to Ironwood and attending a social event and meeting a judge in Ironwood who said, "Oh, so you're the professor who's teaching the lesbian and gay history course at NMU. What we do matters. What we do matters at NMU, and it matters both to our students and it matters to people throughout our region." And then, of course, too, what we do does not only affect LGBTQ people, it affects everybody. One of my points that I make repeatedly is that homophobia doesn't just make homophobia hurts everybody in society. Is preventing a person from out enough, or is there anything I could do? I was just going on about how the improvements in climate at NMU have had
yeah, Dr. DeFonso, you're doing the classic Zoom kind of robot thing. One thing that can help is if you turn your video off, it will increase the bandwidth potentially, so that we'll be able to hear you.
Peninsula at large. And I know we do Superior State and for Michigan Tech, but we
Dr. DeFonso, is your internet okay? Oh, I believe you're muted.
There, I'm back.
Okay.
What happened? Come back there. There we go. Okay. Well, I just wanted to say that what we do here matters to people who aren't lesbian, gay, and I know that people from other parts of the Upper Peninsula are knowledgeable and are aware of what we're doing here on campus at NMU, and it has affected people from Sault Ste. Marie to Ironwood. And so I think I've taken about 15 minutes of remarks and comments. So I'd like to open things up for questions.
Yes, we've already received a couple of questions, but other participants, please feel free. We have a lot of time to drop any questions you might want answered into that Q&A feature. Firstly, do you think that the organizing of queer students, faculty, etc., at NMU helped at all in dismantling the compulsive heterosexuality in UP society?
I think that there's maybe a small role that the university has in making people aware of gender and sexuality roles, but much more influential has been modern culture. And so the university helps students in many ways become aware of the institutions of modern culture, but we are I wouldn't overemphasize the role of the university in such a large quality, because there's still so much of it. There's still so much influence for it and about it that that's my sense is that especially at an institution like Northern, which is only part of a much broader, I mean, a small institution in a big state and in a big country. So often with groups too, there's always been some tension between what is our purpose. Is our purpose to make change, or is our purpose to serve as a support and social group for our members? And defeating compulsory heterosexuality is a big social change, and sometimes we're not always up for those big battles all the time.
I think I would agree with what Chet has been saying here in regards to the organizations. And of course, there's always a change up depending on who's around, who's involved. You know, even on our allies list, we have a lot of allies members who have signed up, but we have a core group who are the handful of members who, you know, come to the meetings, who help to plan events, who are making the decisions of, you know, what way should we go with things. And that's important. And our student groups always, they change up with whatever students are here, who wants to attend. And like, you know, like Chet says, well, what is their purpose? We've had groups who just want to be social groups because you just want to get together with your friends and hang out and do similar things and not always have to explain who you are. And others are, no, we've got, you know, we're here to change the world, and you know, that, so the groups always define themselves of what it is that they want to be and who they want to be and what's important to the particular students who are coming through at the time. I think groups like our allies group that we do have, though, helps to provide a little bit of support, a little bit of mentorship, a little bit of recognizing who students or community members could come and talk to if they have questions or just want to share a thought or an idea or point something out and feel safe in doing it. And a little bit, I think some of us provide that mentorship that we didn't get when we were growing up because we didn't have all the access to the social media, to, you know, people on TV and movies and so forth. You know, man, if you got a book or a novel, you read that thing from cover to cover and you practically memorized it. And now you can find, you know, a plethora of books on every topic, including gay and lesbian and transgender people, non-binary people, however people choose to identify today. But we didn't have those options before. And so it's a marvelous change. And I think just, you know, having organizations there and being available, it can be a big plus. It lets people feel a little bit more normalized in this crazy world that's out here. So
If I could
Alright.
just, if I
Yeah.
could just, if I could just add on, you could say that the questions or concerns, no, or just the general matter of compulsory heterosexuality is a section or a subset of the patriarchy and the dominance of patriarchal, heteropatriarchal attitudes. And Northern has had some real issues and concerns. I'm being platitudinous now, I know, but Northern has had some issues around the questions of gender and of the patriarchy, and I don't think there's been all that much great support on the part of NMU to really address gender issues. Shirley and I are both involved with a gender studies program, and we've done some good things for it, but compared to a lot of other of our peer institutions,
right.
really there hasn't been that much institutional support for gender studies. NMU, no, there hasn't been, and it's hard to get involved. It's hard to really address those big fundamental things like compulsory heterosexuality when you've got the patriarchy to deal with at an institution. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Absolutely. Our next question kind of comes in with a little bit of context. So many college students are often struggling to figure out who they are as mature adults. And part of that can be gaining comfort with their sexual identity. There are a lot of people who are allies and want to be supportive, but how to do that isn't always clear. So if you might comment on how people with some degree of power, like supervisors and professors, might effectively be allies, and how that compares with how peers can be good allies.
I think that through the years, we've seen a lot of increase in peer support. Again, I think like Chet was mentioning, we have so many people who have had more broad experiences, who come from, you know, bigger areas, from cities and such, where they've maybe been surrounded by a lot of LGBT folks their entire life. And this is just how it is, as opposed to those who maybe come from more rural areas, especially across the Upper Peninsula, where you probably do know someone who is LGBT, but you don't know it because they're still afraid to be who they are, or afraid to admit it, or the consequences that they might suffer if they are out in their home or in their community. So there's different ways you can be allies. Come to the allies meeting, read up on some of the literature, come to events such as this and listen in to what some of the other folks are saying. Always, just like many of the folks on the previous presentation talked about, is go to the people who are involved. If you want to know about LGBT things, then talk to other LGBT people, take their thoughts and ideas into consideration. We're the people with the lived experience. And some people outside of our community don't have that lived experience, just like with the Native communities, with the African American communities. I fill in the blank for whatever minority you want. But by the same token, don't make us the tokens. We don't always have to be the ones out there explaining every single little thing. And be cognizant of what it is that you're asking us about. I don't know if, if you have anything else to add or not, Chet, but.
I think for people in positions of seniority or of pedagogy at the institution, it's important to stay abreast and stay aware of what the current discussions and state of the conversation is regarding words. Words are very important for everybody, but particularly for people who are in a minority or oppressed communities. And so language changes. Language changes from year to year and particularly from decade to decade. So what may have been an acceptable phrase or term in one decade may lose that sense of being permissible. And in reverse, words which are regarded as hostile, or unacceptable at one period may later be neutralized or adopted by a community. Also, the words that members of a community use to refer to themselves may change over time. And I'm thinking now, and particularly in terms of language for related to transgender issues and concerns. And that's something that I have been working on myself, including preferred pronouns on syllabi and in a media format in general. I'm not perfect yet. I mean, I am learning as I go along, but I think it's part of a general responsibility for people to stay abreast of discussions relating particularly to minority conversations. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think at one point, while you were speaking, when your internet kind of cut out a little bit, you were starting to talk about how homophobia affects everybody. And we have a participant who'd like for you to kind of start over so that we can get that very valuable information.
Well, I have to refer to things that relate to me personally. I have lived in Marquette for a long time, and I go out in Marquette to bars and restaurants. And a few years ago, I was at one of our local watering holes, a brewing establishment, and a young woman walked up to me and said, "I'd like to buy you a beer." And I never say no when somebody offers to buy me a beer. And she went to the bar, got me my beverage, and she said, "I was in your world history class a few years ago, and I just sat in the back. I didn't contribute a whole lot. It was a hard time for me. I got a B- in your course. But what I wanted to say was it was so important that you were gay and that you didn't make a big deal of it, but you referred to it in passing in the class. And she said, I'm not gay, but I have a brother who's gay. And it just meant a lot to me because I could see that you can be a professor and you can, have a career, and being gay is not going to take over your life, but it's just there, or it's part of your identity. And she said after that I was able to go back home and give support to my brother, who was just coming out, to our parents. And then I was able to talk to my parents about that. And I told my parents that I had a gay history professor who was very popular on campus. And just a normal person.
Mhm.
And that's just a little bit, but that's what happens on a day-to-day basis. And homophobia is when you don't have any kind of reference to make to someone. When you have the fear of identity, and it doesn't just affect the person who's lesbian, gay, bisexual, it affects their entire social network, their family, their friends, everybody around them.
Mm.
Shirley, would you like to speak to how homophobia affects everyone at all?
I don't know that I have anything specifically better to add, so I will just leave it with Chet's story there.
All right. Our next question regards the Pride and Pride in Marquette. So who started the Pride Fest here, and was that NMU? Does it draw people in from the region? So it's from someone who's not part of the who's not in the NMU community, and so just not sure of the origin.
I think there were several attempts to establish a regular festivity. The current organization, current celebration taking place, I believe it started it started, if I'm right, was the first Pride perhaps in Tourist Park? I know, or was it in Harlow Park? But I think
I think
Tourist.
it was Tourist Park, Chet.
Yeah, and I
I
know
remember that. I seem to remember that.
a young trans-identified trans person, Marissa Wolf, was very much involved, along with some other community people as well, who got the permits and who contacted the vendors, and who worked also with NMU students who were in town over the summer. The issue or concern for some people here has been the timing of a Pride festival. Nationwide, Prides generally take place in the summertime, but here, because of our transient population, so many NMU students are not present in Marquette over the summer. So in recent years, the Pride observance and celebration has been shifted to September,
Right.
out at Tourist Park. Of course, the concern there is that our weather is not always conducive to outdoor celebrations and events. But it was originally community people, and from what I understand, Marissa really was the dynamo of energy and getting this going. But an event like Pride doesn't take place just from one person. It takes a lot of contributions from people in the community.
Right. Right. So if our listener is interested, they could check out the website for UP Rainbow Pride, and they can get contact information about becoming involved in it or getting more information. And I believe Marissa's email or that is out there as well, or the organization's email at the very least, so they could get more information that way as well.
Great. So our next question, can either of you speak to where LGBTQ plus folks in the UP fall regarding their political affiliation, whether conservative or liberal?
Ooh. I don't have any specific information on it. I don't. Chet, do you know any?
Well, I I don't keep a I don't keep a list, and I don't.
Nor do I. I think probably like everybody else across all the communities, you've got people everywhere, you know, you've got some who are very liberal, some who are very conservative, and everywhere in between. We're not just, it's not just going to say, okay, so if you're LGBT, obviously you're Democratic. That isn't always the case. Sometimes you're not. And, you know, just like any other individual person, you have your own thoughts, your own ideas, your own political views, and that's how it is. It's not, everybody is not one thing.
Mhm. I do know that in the Democratic Party, there have been some LGBTQ people who have been out and who have received support from political connections in the Upper Peninsula as well as out of state. And I do know that from my own experience in the Democratic Party. And there have been some people who have run for and who've won a political office in the Upper Peninsula
Right.
um, while being members of the LGBTQ community.
Absolutely.
Some of them as recognized Democrats, others as independents or nonpartisan, not in nonpartisan elections.
Great. Our next question comes from an education student. What are some of the things that teachers can do to increase acceptance of LGBTQ plus students in schools?
If you are truly an ally, you've got to be there. You've got to be supportive. You've got to stop the bullying. You've got to use inclusive language, refer to people how they want to be referred to. As Chet was saying, use the correct pronouns. That it's so important. We need to recognize everyone where they're at. If you have trans students, you've got to make their experience in school just as positive as everybody else's experience. And, you know, sometimes you have to put yourself out on a limb, but you have to do what's right for every student who's in your classroom. So it doesn't hurt to include, you know, we've got people from all backgrounds. You can learn about an LGBT mathematician and talk about them, or an author, or a scientist, or a musician. Find them, include them as just part of your regular lesson so that people from LGBT backgrounds become just as normalized as people from every other background. So if you're going to work to include women in your history lessons, make sure you're including, you know, everyone, all the minorities, whatever backgrounds people might come from, be inclusive. And, you know, you're going to make a mistake somewhere along the line. Apologize and move on. Don't make a big thing of it. Don't sit there and belabor it. And don't put the onus back on the student who's usually figuring things out for themselves too. Or perhaps they come from a household where their parents are LGBT, you know, and they're trying to figure everything out too.
I would recommend that particularly new educators work closely with sympathetic administrators in their building or in the district, because it really does need to be a team effort in improving conditions in public education or private education for that matter too, but particularly in public administration, where politics do play a role in the way that education is maintained and is affected in our world. So making sure that you have the support of administration is really important in being able to provide consistent support for students. Bullying is a big issue, and that's something that a single person in the classroom cannot undertake themselves. It has to be done with a concerted effort on the part of a whole team that goes up, not just in the building, but out of the building as well. The other specific thing I would mention is that the state of California has mandated the inclusion of LGBTQ history in their history curriculum. So look at the California school curriculum websites and see what they're doing out in California. In general, California is addressing diversity in all of its manifestations appropriately because it is such a diverse state, but they are among the pioneers in LGBTQ education in their public school system. Michigan's not too far behind, but California is ahead.
What a great resource. I think we have time, and we only have one more question, so perfect. And this one, maybe Chet, as a historian, might know more about, but were there ever any community gathering spaces for the LGBTQ plus community in Marquette, like gay bars or bookstores, things like that?
Well, I wish that Bobby Glenn Brown was here because he was going to be on the panel this morning. Bobby grew up here in Marquette and has a much longer memory of life in Marquette in the 70s. There were bars and restaurants in Marquette before 1990 that were somewhat welcoming to LGBTQ people. The first more or less regular public gathering place for queer people in Marquette was the Landmark Hotel on the 6th floor on Thursday nights. There was what I called the gay guy group, the GGG, but it was a diverse group. It did have some participation from bisexual, lesbian, transgender people, primarily gay guys on Thursday nights. And it was done with the real support, although not public announcement, but it did have the approval of the owner of the Landmark Hotel, Christine Pezola, at the time. She knew what was going on. She encouraged it. She hired handsome gay bartenders to work behind the bar. And that was in the late 90s. It was from about 1997, I'd say, through the early 2000s. Someone also mentioned Sweet Violet's, the feminist bookstore on 3rd Street, which I believe goes back to the early 90s. And
I believe it's been that long as well. And small bookstores, they're hard to keep open and keep supported, but that was a great place to go and meet others from the community and to get a lot of the books and resources. And man, they had buttons and bumper stickers and cards, and they carried much more than books. So they were a great resource as long as they were able to keep it open. But unfortunately, it went the way of a lot of other small independent bookstores. So
there was also, back in the early 90s, an annual gathering called Homecoming.
Yes.
The annual homecoming for the LGBTQ community held up at the Negaunee Township Hall. And usually featuring a live band. People would get dressed up, a lot of lesbians in tuxedos.
Yes.
And held in October, but I do remember going up there in October in the middle of blizzards.
Yes, because that was the big event, if you missed that, man, you missed it for the whole year. So yeah, it was a great event as long as that was sustainable as well. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much to both of you, Professor Brazo, Professor DeFonso, for your insight on being LGBTQ in the UP. We are all out of time, and so must transition to the next presentation, but it's been such a pleasure to learn from you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zoe.